Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's been a very long time since we did our afternoon Friday readings, and you may notice that the time changed. We're doing 3:30, of course, instead of 2:30, because a lot of you are doing schoolwork and different activities, so I figured 3:30 would be a good time. My name is Sean Forschler. For those of you just joining us, I am a realtor in DC, and the reason I thought about doing this was because I have a lot of friends that are teachers, and I have a lot of friends that have children. So I know that with teaching at home, it can be a little overwhelming. So I wanted to be able to give just like a little bit of a break. Kids get sick of hearing the same voice, so they want to hear something different, a different person, see a different person just see a different person. So anyway, that's what made me want to do this. And if you can't catch this right now, it is going to be on my Sean Forschler Realtor Facebook. So you can always look it up on my wall because the live video will be accessible later. And then I also have my YouTube channel, and you can just Google Sean Forschler YouTube, and it will come up, and it's under, I have a playlist called Children's Weekly Reading Corner, and it will be there. You can also find all my other videos that I've read over the several weeks before summer in that playlist as well. Let's see, anything else? No, I think that's about it. Does anybody have any questions? No, I know you can't. I can't hear your questions. I guess you could post them in the comments, but I'm not going to read the comments while I'm reading. So anyway, we left off. For those of you just joining us, I'm going to do like a little bit, and even for those of you who were with us with the book I was reading before we went on summer break, I'm going to do a little recap to remind everybody. And this is a nonfiction book, which is the type of literature that is factual. Fiction, of course, being, a story that's made up. So this is a nonfiction book, and when I taught fourth grade many years ago, I read it to my class, and they loved it. It's pretty intense, but the name of the book, and I apologize for the reverse lettering, but it's called Buried in Ice, The Mystery of a Lost Arctic Expedition. So this is a story about a lost Arctic expedition. And the way it's told is there's anthropologists who study history as related to humans. They found some graves up in the Arctic, and they wanted to research this lost expedition that occurred back in 1845, I believe it was, so a long time ago. And they're going to be doing some research, but to give background on it, they tell the story of what happened back in the 1840s. So just to recap a little bit, it kind of centers on, chapter 2 is called Setting Sail for the Arctic. So the ships were English, they came from England. Sir John Franklin was the captain, and there's a picture of him. Yes, this is Sir John Franklin. He's the captain of the whole expedition, and there are two ships. There's the Erebus and the Terror, appropriately named, right? The Terror. So they leave England. This is in May of 1845. They leave and they go. What they're trying to do is to discover what's called the Northwest Passage, and it's a passage that goes from the European side of the globe. They're trying to cut through this passage that goes kind of through northern Canada, between northern Canada and the Arctic, to reach Asia. They thought that was a quick route to go rather than going all the way around the other side, which ideally it might have been, but it's tragic what happened, and they talk about that at the beginning of the story. So anyway, they set sail for this Northwest Passage, and it kind of revolves, the two main characters we're dealing with is John Torrington and Luke. And John Torrington, who is this guy right here, that's John Torrington, he is very excited about the mission. And this is Luke, and Luke is a little worried. He feels like something's not going to go well. So he has kind of like a foreshadowing of something bad. John Torrington is gung-ho. He's like, yes, I can't wait to go. We're going to be famous when we come back. So he is very excited. Now what happens is John Torrington gets very sick, and they're not really sure what's going on. But here he is, John Torrington, right there. He's in sick bay, and these are some of the crewmen there with him. So he's really sick, and they don't really know what's going on. And Luke had become a good friend of his, and Luke goes to visit him, and John Torrington can't read or write, but Luke can. So Luke takes a lot of notes and writes down stuff for John Torrington. And let's see, I think, yes. So that's kind of where we're at. So John Torrington's in the sick bay. The expedition has gotten started, and they have reached this place called Beachy Island. And remember, they left in September of 1845. Well, now it's late September 1845. And we're going to start, and the name of the chapter, this one's called Winter Camp. So now it's winter's coming. Remember, it's the Arctic. September is going to be, basically winter starts right after August. It gets very cold very fast. So they're going to winter in this spot instead of continuing to go through the Northwest Passage, which right now is frozen solid. It's iced. All right, let's get started. Luke took several big gulps of fresh, cold air and paused for a few minutes before going down the hatch. So down the hatch in the ship where like all the crew members were and the crew members that were sick. So he goes down below the deck. The soot and grease from the lamps and candle flames coated the men's skin, clothing, and hair. Most of the sailors smoked pipes, which added to the smell, and many of the men had stopped washing altogether, finding that a layer of dirt and grease on their bodies helped keep out the increasing cold as winter approached. Luke gazed around him. They were anchored in a small protected bay just off Beachy Island. They had passed the island several weeks earlier on their search for the passage, that's the Northwest Passage. Then their way had been blocked by ice, and now with the sailing season rapidly coming to a close, they had been forced to come back here to spend the winter. Luke knew they might be icebound for as long as 10 months, so almost a whole year. They would not complete the passage this first year. Across the bay, the rugged dark gray cliffs of North Devon rose almost straight out of the water like the walls of a fortress. Behind the two ships lay Beachy Island, its gravelly slopes gently rising up to a high, flat plain. Luke listened. Except for the sounds of the men on the shore setting up the winter camp, it was very quiet here. Few birds, plants, or thankfully insects. He still had scars from the mosquitoes on Disco Island, which had left his neck raw. The last 3 months had been a blur. There had been periods of intense boredom, like the week they spent in Baffin Bay waiting for the ice to clear. But then they had at least been able to cross the bay into Lancaster Sound. Luke would never forget the honking of the snow geese and screams of the gulls echoing off the sheer cliffs. And then they had entered a bleak stretch of smaller islands and channels, like a maze that you could never find your way out of. After a while, every icy path began to look the same. They didn't have GPS back then, so it's a lot harder to find your way around. They had seen a whaling ship at the end of July when they spent several days moored to a drifting iceberg, but since then there had been no contact with the outside world. But already they had followed hundreds of miles of unexplored coast. They had changed the map of the world forever, just as John had promised they would. John. Luke went below and took a deep breath before going into sickbay. Every day it became more difficult to visit his friend, who was getting weaker and weaker. The medicines weren't helping. Neither was the rest or good food. John only got out of bed now for his daily walks around the deck, which the doctor insisted on. John was lying on his back, a bowl of tinned meat and potatoes propped on his chest. "Here," he said when he saw Luke, "I can't eat it." Again, Luke took the bowl from his friend. "No, I don't want it. You can have it." Luke shrugged and began to eat John's meal. It tasted delicious, but he couldn't help but feeling guilty. This was the 4th day in a row that he had finished John's food for him because John was still pretending the doctors that he was eating well. "Good, is it?" John asked. He looked almost pained at watching his friend eat with such gusto. Luke shoveled a huge spoonful of meat into his mouth. "The rest of us are still eating salted fish," he said with his mouth full. Some of the men were boasting about all the local birds they would shoot, but it's hardly made a difference. The best meat goes to the officers anyway. John nodded. You need to bring down a bear or a caribou, something bigger. He sighed deeply. If I could just get off this ship. Luke scraped the side of the bowl clean and put it down. One of the men on the ship says the Eskimos in the north live off the meat they catch all the time. They use harpoons and hooks carved out of bone to catch fish and seals. Why can't we do that? All right, so let's see. A couple illustrations. So this is actually a photograph of the shores of Beachy Island, and it's pretty desolate. You can see that's a photo. It looks like a painting. And then this is actually a painting on this side. It says, some of Franklin's sailors tried to add their rations of salt by shooting seabirds. Whaling ships above, which I'll show you, hunted not for whale meat, but for blubber, which was made into oil used to light lamps in England. So yeah, this is all before electricity. So you can see, so that's a whaling ship there. And you can see the men. All right. John frowned and picked at the edge of his blanket. Luke noticed how pale and thin his hands were. We could, I suppose, but why would we want to? We have thousands of pounds of tinned food on board. That's what John Torrington is saying to Luke. But what happens if our food runs out? Luke said. What happens if the ice doesn't break up in the spring? You said yourself it can happen. Luke's voice began to rise. Why are you saying these things? John was practically shouting. We will find the passage before this winter. All of England awaits our return. Luke stared at his friend. But we're anchored off Beachy Island for the winter. We'll be here until next spring. The captain has already said we won't be. John grabbed Luke's wrist. His grip was surprisingly fierce, and he spoke through gritted teeth. I know you're trying to keep things from me. I can't trust you anymore. I must find a way to talk to Sir John myself. Luke was silent. He was too scared to say anything. Talk to Sir John, it's the captain. What could his friend mean? More and more he wished that John had gone back to England on the Barretto Jr. Because I don't know if you remember, Luke got hurt at the very beginning, and he could have gone back on this ship back to England called the Barretto Jr., but he decided to stay on. So another painting here, drawing. When the weather turned cold, crewmen attempted to break a path through the ice for the ships. So here they are trying to break a path. Let's see. Yeah, we'll read a little bit more. The next morning, Luke helped to row the ship's boat over to the island camp. The bay was calm, and there was a glassy sheet of ice on the water that crunched gently as the prow of the boat broke it apart. Soon the ships would be permanently locked in ice for the winter. There was much to be done before then. Already the weather was turning colder, and the hours of sunlight became fewer each day. On the island, men were constructing a carpenter's shop, a large storehouse, and a small canvas-covered wood-framed structure to house the forge and anvil. Tents were erected, as well as a number of observation platforms for surveying and lookouts. Beside a small stream, fed by the still-melting snow higher up on the island, stood a row of metal tubs to serve as a washing area for the crews. Imagine how cold that water would be. No, thank you. The sound of gunshots came from the steep cliffs to the west. Luke followed the sound to the shooting gallery that had been set up farther down the beach. There, William Brain, one of the Royal Marines from the Erebus, was practicing his marksmanship, aiming at a far-off pile of discarded tin cans. So he's practicing his shooting. Want to try a shot, boy? He asked when he saw Luke. Yes, sir. Thank you. Luke stepped into the stone circle and watched carefully while Brain stuffed gunpowder and a bullet down the muzzle and handed him the gun. Luke hefted the shotgun to his shoulder, aimed and fired. He hit a tin can and it popped into the air at the impact. You are not a bad shot, lad, said Brain, eyeing Luke keenly. A polar bear was sighted near the camp this morning, and a group of us are going out to see if we can find it. I could use someone to help me carry my gear. Want to come along? All right, let me show you some, well, this is kind of a lot of stuff. So there's an illustration here of the ship. So once a safe harbor was found, the sailors worked quickly to prepare the ships for the Arctic winter. They knew that they could be icebound for months. So let's see. And then there's 4 things that they're showing that they're doing. So number 1 is sailors built a wall of snow blocks around the ship to add an extra layer of insulation. So let me show you that first. So you can see there, he's building snow blocks around the outside of the ship. Number 2, all heavy supplies were taken off the ship so that it would be light enough to bob free of moving ice instead of being crushed between giant slabs of it. So number 2, right here, you can see he's hoisting the goods off the ship. And number 3, a huge canvas tent was erected over the deck so that the sailors would have a place to exercise. So you can see right here, there's the big canvas. And then last, a hunting party heads off in search of fresh meat. And there is the hunting party. All right, and we'll keep going. One last thing. The Erebus carried a steam locomotive engine attached to a propeller. This powerful engine was meant to drive the ship through ice-blocked seas. And there's just a little diagram right here. Today our ships, we call them icebreakers, and they'll actually plow through and bust up ice. But our ships, of course, are made out of much stronger elements and material than just wood. These are all wood. Later that afternoon, Luke trudged out of camp with a group of men from the Erebus. Among them were 2 young brothers, Tom and John Hartnell, whom Luke had met a few days before. The sky was overcast as usual. Over each shoulder was slung a rifle and a canvas bag filled with ammunition, food, knives, and extra clothing. Normally, I carry my own things, Brain explained, but I've been in sick bay for much of the past week. Stomach cramps made me lose my appetite, but it's nothing serious. I'll be back to my old self in a day or 2. Luke glanced at the older sailor. For the first time, he noticed the sheen of sweat on the tall man's wide brow, and how Brain's white skin stood out against his curly black beard and the red kerchief that he wore around his neck. Poor old John has been in and out of sick bay too, said Thomas Hartnell, glancing anxiously at his younger brother who walked behind them. But all this fresh air and exercise is bound to do him good. The small party headed across the narrow spit of land that joined Beechy Island to North Devon. Luke felt a prickle of anticipation in his stomach that he knew was both excitement and fear. Other men had seen as many as 5 polar bears at a time on Devon. He was sick to death of hearing how magnificent and powerful they were. For a long time now, he had wanted to see one of these beasts for himself. Maybe this would be his chance. The men wandered for over 2 hours. Luke hoped they wouldn't have gone too much further. His woolen shirt was plastered against his skin with sweat, and it made him feel clammy and cold. He was also starting to feel very lost, almost dizzy. He would find himself tripping over a rock that he thought was miles away. Once the camp and the snow-streaked cliffs were out of sight, one hill which looked much like the next. Sometimes it seemed as though the gray land and the sky blended into one. Besides, he could see that Brain was tiring. His breath was raspy, and twice now he had stumbled for no reason. Then suddenly, there it was, about 100 yards ahead of them. Luke wouldn't have noticed it loping along if the bear hadn't stopped and raised its powerful body up on its hind legs to test the breeze for scent. Its huge forelegs hung straight down as if it stood at attention. Luke was surprised that he didn't feel scared. The animal didn't look mean or threatening, just very, very big. As Luke and the other men raised their guns, he noticed the bear's paws for the first time. They were the size of a man's head. Luke thought about the crushing power of those paws, and his mouth went dry. Beside him, Brain was aiming carefully. "Let me take him," the Marine said, and as Luke watched, Brain fired. The shot hit the bear, but to Luke's astonishment, it seemed to have no effect. The huge bear simply dropped to its legs and kept moving forward. He was coming toward them. Brain reloaded quickly, and Luke could see that his hands were trembling. The Marine aimed and shot again. A shower of ice exploded in front of the bear's head. It stopped in its tracks, but it kept coming. The bear started to run toward them. The other 4 men raised their guns now, but Luke was the fastest. Sighting along his rifle, he aimed and fired. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled his nostrils, and he closed his eyes against the smoke. When he opened his eyes, Brain was clapping him on the shoulder, and the other men were running toward the bear that lay slumped on the ground, looking more like a hammock of snow than a man-eating beast. "Well, congratulations," Brain said heartily. "You've done a good job. We'll have fresh meat to eat for a while, and you'll have something to talk about when you get home." Luke smiled. He felt happy for the first time in weeks. 2 things I want to show you, and then I think we will stop for today. So we have a pair of goggles that they found, actually real goggles they found that were used by the crewmen to protect from snow blindness. And you need to have that up in the Arctic because all that snow, snow reflects light because it's so white, bright. So they would have to wear goggles so they wouldn't, so they could actually see. So these goggles, they're very old, so they're not in the best shape. They've rusted. But it's kind of neat to see what an actual pair of goggles, kind of what they look like. And then here's a great painting. This is one of my favorite paintings in the book. And it shows all the men aiming at the bear. All right, so I think we're going to go ahead and stop today. And next week we'll be on chapter 5. And let's see, how many chapters? I think we've got 7 chapters. So we'll finish this up in the next few weeks. But anyway, thank you for joining me today. I hope you all learned something and enjoyed today's story. And I will see you live again next Friday, 3:30 p.m. Have a good weekend, everybody.